Welcome to the Acid Trash Jamboree, and to the first episode in a good while. Okay, so in today's video I'll be keeping it simple and talking about a single project, namely the psychedelic folk duo Emtidi, who I first became aware of a couple of decades back when I spotted their name on the infamous Nurse with Wound list. I've mentioned it on the channel before, but if you've never heard of it, this is a sprawling list of obscure, underground and experimental music, which the project Nurse with Wound included inside their first two LPs. It was initially intended as a guide to the artists that influenced the early Nurse sound, though over the ensuing decades it's gone on to become the go-to guide for freak sounds from the 60s and 70s. Emtidi, as it turns out, are one of the more melodic and musical entries on the list, though I remember reading that some artists were included on the strength of them having produced just one or two weird or avant-garde leaning tracks, so that would most likely explain their name check. Anyways, Emtidi's members, Canadian Dolly Holmes and German Maik Hirschfeldt, met in London circa 1970, before moving on to Berlin, where they commenced their musical activities, following a stint performing in the famous hippie musical Hair. Their rather slim and compact discography consists of two LPs released between 1970 and 1972. Then, following Holmes' departure, apparently Hirschfeldt attempted to make a third LP with an expanded lineup, though by the sounds of things, it was never finished, so these recordings are presumably now either completely lost or they're sitting in a vault somewhere gathering dust. Outside of that, as far as I'm aware, unfortunately there's not very much out there about Emtidi. And yeah, this dearth of info has, on occasion, led to certain people making up most probably totally bogus stuff about them. Yeah, in particular, there was a rather unfair and misleading piece published many years back in Wire magazine, which tried to paint a picture of them as a pair of clueless, naive dunderheads who wouldn't have known a psychedelic jam if it smacked them in the face, and that the only reason they ever did anything of note, namely their second album, Saat, was because producer Rolf-Ulrich Kaiser basically sabotaged their music against their will, polishing up what would otherwise have been a boring, folky turd of a record. Of course, if we're talking about Krautrock and Kosmische Musik in general, Kaiser remains a controversial figure for this type of thing, mostly because of the situation regarding the series of Cosmic Jokers albums, which were allegedly covertly recorded, then edited, mixed, and released without the artist's consent. I'll talk about Saat itself in more depth later, but for me anyways, it's difficult to imagine how Kaiser could have pulled off such a feat here at least, considering that Emtidi wrote and sang all the songs, as well as playing most of the instruments, including the synths and mellotron that give the album a lot of its spacey flavour. Yeah, to my ears, on Saat, they sound totally on board with Kaiser's production, and in fact, we can hear that they were already well on the path towards this sound on their self-titled debut, released in 1970 on the Thoraphon label, then pirated on CD by the notorious Germanophon label in the 90s. Unfortunately, this was the only version available back when I decided to check the band out. The excellent Garden of Delights and Wah Wah labels have since done legit reissues, though I'm yet to pick either one up. Anyways, I'll stop going on about it in a second, but in the Wire article, seemingly in order to suit his fanciful narrative about Saat being a piece of Kosmische exploitation, the journalist simply dismisses the debut as dull and straight ahead, conveniently leaving out the part about it steadily getting more out there and experimental as it goes along. Indeed, if you bother to listen beyond the first few songs, which in fairness aren't all that earth-shattering though, they're appealing enough. Once we get to Space Age, things start to change. The mid-song jam and the snatch of synthesizer that closes proceedings, setting us up nicely for the second half. This commences with the self-explanatory "let the joint go round," a moody, modal effort with a loose, freewheeling arrangement and dark, droning guitar work, which sounds heavily inspired by raga folk fusion pioneers like Davy Graham and Sandy Bull. Next up, Yvonne's Dream is altogether less frantic. Its central guitar figure and enchanting wordless vocal refrain, conjuring up an atmosphere that's both serene and pleasant, but also rather spooky and uncanny, reminiscent of certain passages from Dom's excellent Edge of Time album. Birds on a Graveyard is a gorgeous solo 12-string showcase from Hirschfeldt, which very much suggests that he probably had a couple of Robbie Basho LPs in his collection, nestled alongside the Davy and Sandy. Then the closer, flute piece, is a spirited 7-minute free folk wig out, with some thoroughly kooky flute playing from Hirschfeldt, who's doing his best Ian Anderson impersonation, on top of Holmes' jangling bouzouki drone. Going back to the Nurse with Wound list a second, I recall reading somewhere that this was most likely the piece that ensured Emtidi got included. So yeah, so much for this LP supposedly being 100% bog standard and boring. Now, by 1972, the duo had caught the ear of the aforementioned Rolf-Ulrich Kaiser, meaning they signed up to his Pilz label, which for a time was also home to the amazing Popol Vuh, as well as fellow acid folkies like Witzhuser and Vestrup, Brosel Machine, Flute and Voice, and the first incarnation of Holderlin. And yeah, as I said, the lone album that Emtidi made for Kaiser basically picks up where the first one left off, albeit now with his and mixer/contributing musician Dieter Dirk's arsenal of instrumentation and studio effects at their disposal. Each half of Saat is structured in the same way, with an accessible, catchy song, followed by a more ambient-leaning mood piece, then concluding with a 10-minute plus workout. The song Walking in the Park gets things underway, with Holmes' haunting and melancholic verse melody, backed by nicely phased-out 12-string picking, delicate electric piano chimes, and clouds of funereal organ. The song's chorus is altogether more upbeat and major key, capped off with the amusing refrain, "Don't sit on the grass, it's too cold for your ass," after which the players break off into an extended, high-energy jam, Hirschfeldt getting down to some cool West Coast guitar soloing over a manic bass pattern. The following track, Trauma, is much more minimalistic, sporting a beautiful, wordless vocal line over a simple, circular organ pattern, after which we reach the LP's centerpiece, Touch the Sun. And yeah, talk about a cosmic hippie epic. Following a soporific, deeply psychedelic instrumental intro of gentle organ shimmer, fragile spinet tinkling, and spacey glissando guitar, which seems to last for days but in reality is only about 5 minutes long. The main song portion wakes us from our dream state, lifting us time and time again into a state of nirvana with its soaring melody and lyrical message of utopian unity. We get another strange instrumental detour partway through, with classically informed key lines over more of those lovely, wide-open, Basho-esque 12-string cadences. Then, after one last blissful chorus, the song blasts off into the cosmos, propelled by jets of synth, organ, and mellotron. So yeah, quite the trip. For many, me included, this is Emtidi's masterpiece. And yeah, it's hard not to get swept along by its drama, even if the hippy-dippy sentiment makes you cringe. There's nothing quite as eventful to be found on Saat after this ecstatic peak, though it's still worth your time for the most part. The altogether more earthbound Love Time Rain opens the second half. Its catchy melody and propulsive acoustic backing cut from the same cloth as some of Pentangle's more modal arrangements, like House Carpenter from Basket of Light. For me, the title track is a touch inconsequential, offering up little more than a simple vocal chant and a bit of half-hearted guitar meandering, the LP bowing out with Die Reise, which translates rather appropriately as the journey or the trip. This begins as a monotonous psych folk trance out, dominated by Hirschfeldt's eccentric vocalizations, until it suddenly comes to life, moving through a series of keyboard-led instrumental fantasias, which bring to mind none other than acid trash hero Don Bradshaw Leather's magnum opus, Distance Between Us. Yeah, always a welcome reference point as far as I'm concerned. So that's Emtidi for you. A very worthwhile stopping off point if you're on the acid folk journey at all. It's a real shame that they never followed up Saat. Even the material without Holmes on board might have been worth a listen at least, but unfortunately it doesn't seem like we'll ever get to hear it. According to a couple of bios that I found online, after Emtidi, Hirschfeldt became preoccupied with organising rallies in Africa and only plays music on the side as a bit of fun. As for Holmes, it seems that she simply returned to Canada and dropped out of the public spotlight forevermore, the pair thankfully leaving behind a clutch of wonderful music in their wake. Okay, I'll stop there. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more about cool, off-the-beaten-track music and films, then please check out my older videos if you haven't done so already. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you again soon on the Acid Trash Jamboree.